At 10:42 on a busy Thursday morning, Rear Admiral Marcus Vale walked through the main entrance of North Bridge Naval Medical Center, carrying a folder in one hand and holding a leash in the other. At the end of that leash was Rocco. Rocco was only 2 years old, but he already carried himself like a seasoned working dog. Large black and tan German shepherd, broad chest, dark brown eyes, short, dense coat. A faded olive-green Military K9 vest fitted across his shoulders. He stayed close to Marcus always. The Admiral had spent nearly 2 years raising and working with him. Rocco was highly trained mech work, obedience, environmental exposure, medical response. But there was one thing no trainer had ever been able to change. Rocco trusted almost nobody. He tolerated people. He obeyed Marcus. He watched everyone else. If a stranger reached toward his collar, Rocco moved away. If someone tried to pet him without permission, he turned his head. If a person approached too quickly, his body became rigid. Marcus never forced it. Rocco wasn't aggressive by nature. He was simply selective. And Marcus had come to understand that. "Stay close," Marcus murmured. Rocco looked up. The dog's tail moved once. They entered the hospital lobby. Marcus had an administrative meeting with the Naval Rehabilitation Department. Rocco was allowed inside because of his service status, and because Marcus had approved the visit with hospital security beforehand. The hospital staff knew the Admiral was coming. They knew the K9 would be with him, but few of them had actually seen Rocco. A receptionist glanced over. "Good morning, Admiral." "Morning." Her eyes moved toward the dog. "Is that Rocco?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Yes." The dog looked at her. She smiled. Rocco immediately looked back at Marcus. The receptionist laughed. "Still selective?" "Very." Marcus scratched behind Rocco's ear. The dog relaxed. Marcus spent the next 40 minutes moving through administrative offices. Rocco remained beside him. During meetings, the dog rested quietly under the table. When Marcus stood, Rocco stood. When Marcus moved, Rocco moved. When strangers passed, Rocco barely reacted. Everything was normal. Until they reached the rehabilitation wing, Marcus stopped to speak with a physician. He took the leash off his wrist. For only a moment, Rocco remained beside his leg. Then a medical cart rolled past. The wheels made a sharp metallic sound. Rocco turned his head. A nurse stepped through the opposite corridor. Someone called Marcus's name. He looked away for perhaps 10 seconds, then looked back. The leash was still in his hand, but the other end was empty. Marcus froze. "Rocco?" "Nothing." He looked behind him. "Nothing." "Rocco?" His voice became louder. The nearby nurse looked confused. "Admiral, did you see my dog?" She shook her head. Marcus's expression changed instantly. The calm officer disappeared. The dog was his responsibility, his partner, and now he was gone inside a hospital. "Close the elevators." The security supervisor turned. "Sir, close every public exit." Marcus's voice was controlled but urgent. "My K9 is missing." The supervisor immediately reached for his radio. "Attention, all hospital security. Military K9 missing in rehabilitation wing. Begin internal search. Restrict non-essential movement through exits." Within seconds, the hospital changed. Security officers moved through the corridors. Nurses checked waiting areas. Maintenance staff inspected utility rooms. Elevators were monitored. Reception informed. The emergency entrance was watched. Marcus was moving faster than anyone around him. "Rocco!" He checked the stairwell. Nothing. "Rocco!" He looked into the conference rooms. Enter. He opened the family lounge. Nothing. His jaw tightened. A security officer approached. "Sir, we're checking the pediatric floor." "Do it. We'll find him." Marcus nodded. But he wasn't listening. His mind was already working. Rocco didn't wander. He didn't leave Marcus because he saw something interesting. He didn't run after strangers. If he had moved away, there had to be a reason. Before we find out where Rocco disappeared to, and why a military K9 that stayed attached to one admiral suddenly chose to vanish inside a hospital, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to see how far these stories travel. And subscribe for more emotional military K9 stories. Marcus returned to the rehabilitation corridor. He crouched. There were faint paw marks on the polished floor. Nothing unusual. He followed them, 3 steps. Then they disappeared near a junction. He looked left, then right. A nurse pushing a cart stopped. "Sir, did you see a German shepherd?" She shook her head. "No." "Anyone take him?" "No." Marcus stood. He looked down the corridor, then heard something. Not a bark, a very faint sound, a soft metallic click. He turned. Nothing. He followed the sound toward a quieter section of the hospital. The corridor became less crowded. Fewer patients. Fewer staff. Several small private offices. He checked one A, another A. Then he noticed a door slightly open near the end. A small nameplate was fixed beside it. Nurse Clara Hayes. Patient support. Marcus stopped. The room was quiet. He pushed the door open and froze. Rocco was there, but that wasn't what shocked him. The military K9, who had refused nearly every unfamiliar person in the hospital, was lying peacefully across a small rug beside the nurse's desk. His head was resting gently against Clara Hayes' chest as she sat in a chair. Clara's light sky blue medical scrubs were visible beneath the dog. One hand rested lightly along his shoulder. Rocco's eyes were closed. His breathing was slow, completely relaxed. Marcus stared. The Admiral didn't speak. Clara looked up. "Oh." She looked at him, then at Rocco. "He's yours?" Marcus blinked. "Yes." He stepped farther inside. Rocco opened one eye, looked at Marcus, then closed it again. Marcus couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Rocco doesn't do that." Clara smiled faintly. "I figured. You know him?" "No." "Did he approach you?" "Yes." "When?" "About 15 minutes ago." Marcus looked around the office. "What happened?" Clara shrugged. "He came in. Walked straight to me. And then, he seemed tired." Marcus looked at Rocco. The dog had never slept on a stranger, never. Not in training. Not during travel. Not around officers. Marcus stepped closer. "Did he let you touch him?" Clara nodded. "I didn't touch him first." Marcus stopped. "What?" Clara looked at him. "I sat down." She pointed toward the floor. "He stayed near the door. I didn't call him. I didn't reach for him. After a few minutes, he walked over. I kept my hand low. He sniffed it, and then he put his head here." She touched the side of her chest. Marcus stared. "How long has he been asleep?" "Maybe 10 minutes." Marcus looked at Rocco again. The dog was completely peaceful. The hospital had spent 20 minutes searching the building. Marcus had been imagining every possible danger, and his K9 had apparently wandered into one nurse's office and gone to sleep. On her, Marcus shook his head. "I don't understand." Clara smiled. "Maybe he just needed somewhere quiet." Marcus looked at her. "No." He glanced at Rocco. "Rocco needs someone he trusts." Clara looked down at the sleeping dog. "Then maybe he trusts me." Marcus was silent. Because he couldn't argue with what he was seeing. And for the first time that morning, the Admiral wasn't wondering where his K9 had gone. He was wondering something much more interesting. Why had Rocco chosen this nurse? For several seconds, Rear Admiral Marcus Vale simply stood in the doorway. He had seen Rocco in crowded training yards. He had seen him work through noise. unfamiliar buildings and long hours. He had watched the dog ignore food from strangers and refuse affection from people he didn't know. But now the same K9 was asleep against Nurse Clara Hayes, as if he'd known her for years. Marcus finally spoke. "How did this happen?" Clara looked down at Rocco. "I honestly don't know." Marcus stepped closer. "Did you call him?" "No." "Offer food?" "No." "Use a command?" "No." "Touch his harness?" Clara shook her head. "He came in on his own." She paused. "I was working." He walked to the door. He watched me for a while. Then he came over. Marcus looked at the dog. "That's all?" Clara smiled. "That's all." Marcus crouched several feet away. "Rocco." The dog's eyes opened. He looked directly at his handler. His tail moved once. Then he lowered his head again. Against Clara, Marcus almost laughed. "You've got to be kidding me." Clara smiled. "I don't think he's trying to make you jealous." Marcus stood. "I'm not jealous." He looked at Rocco. "I'm confused." Clara had been working in the hospital for 6 years. She had no military K9 background listed in her employment history. She was a patient support nurse. Her office was one of the quietest rooms in the rehabilitation wing. She handled long-term patient follow-up, family education, discharge planning, and difficult conversations. Marcus looked around the room. It suddenly made sense. Soft lighting. No loud equipment. No people crowding the doorway. No sudden movements. Nothing that would make an already selective K9 feel pressured. Rocco had found the quietest room in the building. Then, he had found the calmest person in it. Marcus looked at Clara. "You didn't force him?" "No." "Didn't even try?" "No." "Why?" Clara looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Because he didn't need me to." Marcus smiled slightly. "That may be the smartest answer I've heard all morning." A few minutes later, Rocco stood. He stretched. Clara moved her chair back slightly to give him room. Rocco looked at her, then at Marcus, then back at Clara. Marcus held out his hand. "Come on." Rocco walked toward him. He stopped halfway, looked back at Clara, then continued. Marcus noticed. "He checked on you." Clara smiled. "Maybe. He did." Marcus studied her. "You've handled dogs before?" "No." "Pets?" "I grew up around them." "Military dogs?" "No." "Professional training?" "No." Marcus looked confused. "Then, where did you learn to read him?" Clara thought for a moment. "I don't know." "You don't know?" She shrugged. "I've worked with patients long enough to notice when people are uncomfortable." "That includes dogs?" "Sometimes." She pointed toward Rocco. "They don't always tell you what they need." Marcus nodded slowly. "But they usually show you." Clara smiled. "Exactly. If you're enjoying the mystery behind Rocco's unusual trust in Clara, consider subscribing. Sometimes the person who understands a K9 best isn't the one giving commands. It's the one paying attention. And tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to see how far these stories travel. Rocco remained in the office for another 20 minutes. Marcus decided to see what would happen if he left. He stepped into the hallway. Rocco watched. Clara remained seated. The dog followed Marcus to the door, then stopped. He looked back at Clara. Marcus waited. Rocco returned to her. He sat beside the chair. Marcus stared. "You've got to be kidding me." Clara laughed. "I think he's made his decision." Marcus stepped back inside. "Rocco has never chosen a stranger over me." Clara looked uncomfortable. "I don't think he chose me over you." "No." Marcus nodded. "He chose a feeling." Clara looked at him. "What feeling?" "Safety." That word stayed between them. Marcus later brought Chief Petty Officer Nolan Pierce, one of the Navy's senior K9 instructors, to the office. Nolan had worked with dozens of military dogs. He observed Rocco from the doorway. The dog looked at him. then walked toward Clara. Nolan smiled. Interesting. Marcus crossed his arms. That's one word for it. Nolan watched Rocco settle beside Clara. Has he ever done this? Not with an unfamiliar person. Then something about her is reinforcing his calm behavior. Clara looked surprised. I'm not doing anything. Nolan smiled. That's probably why. He explained that working dogs could form strong associations with posture, voice, movement, and environmental predictability. Clara wasn't using a special command. She was simply creating an environment Rocco apparently preferred. Marcus nodded. So she didn't train him. No. She gave him what he needed. Nolan looked at Clara. Exactly. That afternoon, the search was officially called off. Security returned to normal. Staff members who had spent the morning looking for Rocco now wanted to know where he had been. Marcus walked down the hall with the dog beside him. A nurse laughed. We looked everywhere. Marcus glanced at Clara's office. He was never far. The nurse shook her head. He picked the quietest room in the hospital. Marcus smiled, and apparently the right person. Later, Marcus sat in Clara's office. Rocco was resting beneath her desk. Marcus looked at her. Can I ask you anything personal? Sure. Why nursing? Clara smiled. My mother was a rehabilitation nurse. Marcus nodded. That explains the patients. Maybe. She glanced toward Rocco. My first job after college was working in an assisted living facility. Patients there taught me something. What? When people lose control over their environment, they become anxious. She looked at Rocco. So I try to give people choices whenever I can. Marcus nodded. Maybe dogs aren't so different. They aren't. Marcus's admiration grew, but he was also thinking practically. The Navy's K9 program had training facilities that needed people who understood behavior. Not everyone who worked with dogs needed to be a handler. There were positions involving environmental conditioning, family transition, retirement support, handler education, and post-service care. Clara had the kind of observation skills those programs valued. Still, he didn't want to jump to conclusions. He asked, Would you ever consider working with retired K9 teams? Clara laughed. I'm a nurse. You're also someone a highly trained K9 chose to trust. That's one dog. Rocco isn't just one dog. She looked at him. He's unusually selective. I know. And he chose you. Clara shrugged. I sat down. Marcus smiled. Sometimes that's the whole skill. That evening, Marcus returned to his office. He opened Rocco's records. He looked at recent behavioral evaluations. Several notes described Rocco as highly handler-oriented, cautious with unfamiliar personnel, reluctant to accept physical contact outside established relationships, calm in low-stimulation environments. Marcus stared at the last line. Then he looked toward Clara's office. It wasn't luck. Rocco had recognized something. Not her profession, not her rank, not anything superficial. Her behavior, her calm, her respect for distance, her ability to wait. Marcus closed the file. He already knew what he wanted to ask her. The question was whether she would say yes. The next morning, Marcus returned to Clara's office. Rocco was lying near her desk again. Clara looked up. Morning. He placed a folder on the desk. She raised an eyebrow. What is that? An opportunity. For what? Marcus sat down. I want you to meet someone from the Navy's K9 retirement program. Clara frowned. Why? Because they need people who understand how retired working dogs adjust to ordinary life. I don't have K9 credentials. No. But you have something harder to teach. What? Judgment. Clara looked at him. Marcus continued. You didn't approach Rocco. You didn't pressure him. You watched him. You gave him choices, and he trusted you. Clara glanced at Rocco. He made that decision. Marcus smiled. Exactly. Clara hesitated. I don't know anything about Navy K9 programs. You don't need to. You don't need to become a handler. Then what would I do? Consult. Train staff on low-pressure interactions. Help retiring K9S transition. Support veterans and families. Work within your nursing specialty. Clara looked surprised. That sounds like a real job. It is. Why me? Marcus looked at Rocco. Because the dog already answered that question. Clara laughed. I don't think the Navy hires based on dog recommendations. Marcus smiled. Normally no, he stood. But this one made a very convincing recommendation. Rocco lifted his head. He watched Marcus leave, then looked at Clara. Clara smiled. You caused all this. Rocco's tail moved. She shook her head. Your trouble. The dog rested his head again. And somewhere down the corridor, Marcus looked back through the glass panel. The Admiral had entered the hospital that morning, worried about losing his K9. He was leaving with something he hadn't expected to find. A nurse who might have a natural gift for understanding dogs, and a K9 who had just opened the door to an entirely different future for her. The following Monday morning, Clara Hayes found herself sitting in a conference room she had never expected to enter. Across the table sat Rear Admiral Marcus Vale, Chief Petty Officer Nolan Pierce, and two members of the Navy's retired K9 program. A folder rested in front of her. Clara looked at it. You're serious about this? Marcus smiled. Very. She opened it. It wasn't a military enlistment contract. It wasn't a command position. It was a professional consulting and education opportunity. The program needed people who understood rehabilitation, patient behavior, stress responses, and the transition from working environments to civilian life. Clara read slowly. Retired K9 transition support. Nolan nodded. Families often don't know what to expect when a working dog retires. Marcus added, neither do some facilities. Clara smiled. Because everyone focuses on what the dog can do. Nolan nodded. Exactly. They forget to notice what the dog is telling them. Clara looked toward the hallway. That's what Rocco was doing. Yes. They offered her a part-time consulting role. She would continue her nursing career. But when necessary, she could work with the Navy's retirement program to educate hospital staff, families, and rehabilitation teams on low-pressure interaction with former military working dogs. She could also assist in developing hospital policies for visiting service animals and retired K9S. There was no expectation that she become a dog trainer. No military title. No unrealistic promotion. Just a legitimate professional role built around skills she already possessed. Clara looked at Marcus. You really think I can do this? He answered immediately. Yes. Why? Because Rocco trusted you before you knew anything about him. He smiled. I think that's worth paying attention to. If Rocco and Clara's unexpected connection has stayed with you, consider subscribing. Sometimes the smallest moment, a quiet room, a patient heart, a dog choosing where to rest, can reveal something much bigger. And tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to see how far these stories travel. Rocco continued visiting the hospital whenever Marcus brought him. The staff had stopped treating him like a problem. They had learned, give him space. Lamed him to approach. Don't reach over his head. Don't crowd him. Watch his body language. And strangely, the hospital became calmer around him. One nurse even joked, Rocco has better boundaries than most people here. Clara laughed. I'll tell him. Rocco looked at her, his ears lifted. Marcus smiled. He heard that. One afternoon, A veteran patient was struggling to adjust to a new mobility device. He was frustrated. He kept saying, "I hate this." Clara sat beside him. "You don't have to like it today." The man looked at her. "You sound like a K9 trainer." She laughed. "No, I just learned something from one." Rocco was lying nearby. The veteran looked toward him. "That dog?" "Yes." "What did he teach you?" Clara smiled. "That forcing progress usually slows it down." The veteran nodded slowly. "That's probably true." He tried again. This time, he succeeded. Clara smiled. "See?" Rocco lifted his head. Marcus watched from the doorway. He understood why the program had approved her. She wasn't pretending to be a K9 expert. She understood something deeper: behavior, trust, patience, choice. Several weeks later, Marcus brought Rocco into the hospital again. This time, he intentionally stopped near Clara's office. Rocco looked through the doorway, then walked inside. Clara laughed. "You know where you're going now." Marcus leaned against the frame. "He's memorized your office." Rocco crossed the room, climbed carefully onto a large padded mat beside Clara's desk, then lowered his head. Clara looked at Marcus. "I think I'm being replaced." Marcus laughed. "Don't worry, you're still his handler." Rocco opened one eye. Marcus pointed. "See?" The dog looked back at Clara. Marcus laughed again. "Okay, maybe I'm second now." Clara sat beside Rocco. "He's very comfortable here." Marcus nodded. "He is. Does that worry you?" "No." "Why?" "Because he's learned something." "What?" "That trust doesn't mean choosing one person forever." Clara smiled. Rocco's eyes slowly closed. "He can trust you. He can trust me. And he can trust her." He pointed toward the hallway, where a nurse was passing by without trying to touch him. Rocco didn't react. Clara noticed. "He's calmer." Marcus nodded. "You've changed the way people approach him." Clara smiled. "He changed the way I approach people." The official K9 program later invited Clara to a small training session. She stood in a room with several retired military working dogs. None of them knew her. She didn't approach. She sat, waited, watched. One older German shepherd eventually walked toward her. Another remained across the room. A third lay down near the wall. Clara did nothing. Nolan Pierce watched. After several minutes, he nodded. "You see it. Sometimes." "What?" Clara pointed gently. "That one wants distance." She pointed toward another. "That one wants to investigate. And that one? He wants the room to stay quiet." Nolan smiled. Exactly. She hadn't commanded any of them, but she had understood them. That was the skill. Months passed. Clara's consulting role became a regular part of the hospital's rehabilitation program. She developed simple guidelines for staff: how to introduce a retired K9 into a new environment, how to recognize stress, how to avoid unnecessary pressure, how to give the dog a safe place, how to understand that an animal that refuses contact isn't necessarily aggressive. Sometimes, it is simply overwhelmed. Marcus occasionally attended her sessions. He never interrupted. He only watched. Because every time he saw Clara work, he remembered the day he had found Rocco asleep against her chest. That moment had seemed strange. Now it seemed obvious. The dog had known before any human did. One evening, after a training session, Marcus found Clara sitting alone in her office. Rocco was lying beside her. "You did well today." She smiled. "Thank you. You've changed a lot of people." "I didn't expect that." "Neither did I." She looked at Rocco. "It started because he disappeared." Marcus laughed. "Technically, he wandered." She smiled. "Yes, and you found him." "No." She shook her head. "He found me." Marcus considered that. Maybe he did. A few months Later, Rocco officially retired from Marcus's remaining operational duties. He would no longer travel for demanding assignments. He would remain with Marcus in a quieter schedule, but his visits to Clara continued. Every time he entered the hospital, he looked for her office. Sometimes he'd lie beside her while she worked. Sometimes he'd wait near the doorway. Sometimes he'd simply sit and watch. The staff stopped finding it unusual. It became part of the hospital's rhythm. Rocco had his handler. He had his home. And he had one nurse he trusted enough to sleep beside. One evening, Clara looked at the first photograph someone had taken after the incident. Rocco was asleep on her office rug. His head rested against her chest. She was smiling. Marcus stood in the doorway looking completely stunned. She laughed when she saw it. "What were you thinking?" Marcus smiled. "That my dog had betrayed me." Clara laughed. "You admitted that?" "I was under stress." "Of course." He looked toward Rocco. "But I was wrong." "About what?" "He wasn't betraying me." "What then?" Marcus smiled. "He was showing me something." Clara looked at the dog. "What?" "That I wasn't the only person he could trust." She nodded. "That was a good lesson." The hospital eventually created a small recognition program for staff members who made meaningful contributions to patient and service animal care. Clara's name was included. She almost refused. Marcus told her, "Take it." "Why?" "Because it's not for Rocco." She smiled. "What is it for?" "For the skill you already had." Clara accepted. No ceremony was necessary, no spotlight. Just a simple certificate and the respect of people who had seen what she could do. Years later, Clara would still remember that morning, the Admiral, the panic, the hospital search, the doors opening, and the impossible sight of Rocco asleep on her. She would laugh whenever she told the story. Marcus would always interrupt. "Impossible for whom?" "For you." "For me, yes." Rocco, now older and grayer, would be lying nearby. Clara would look at him. "You caused all of this." His tail would move. Marcus would shake his head. "He knows." She'd smile. "I think he does." The final lesson wasn't that Clara had some magical ability to control dogs. She didn't. She hadn't made Rocco behave. She hadn't commanded him. She hadn't forced his trust. She simply gave him something he rarely received from strangers: space, choice, patience, and a quiet place where he didn't have to perform. Rocco chose her, and Marcus had the wisdom to notice that the choice meant something. Instead of dismissing it as a strange moment, he followed it. That decision created a professional opportunity Clara had never expected. A role where her nursing experience mattered, where her understanding of stress mattered, where patience became a skill rather than simply a personality trait. And Rocco, he remained exactly what he had always been: Marcus's K9, his partner, his responsibility. But now he also carried one more memory: the nurse's office, the soft rug, the quiet room, and the woman who had never asked him to trust her. She had simply given him time. Sometimes that's all trust needs. Not a command, not a reward, not pressure. Just someone patient enough to wait. And when Marcus eventually walked out of the hospital with Rocco beside him, he looked back once. Clara stood in her doorway. Rocco stopped, looked back at her, then followed Marcus. Clara smiled, because she knew the dog didn't need to stay behind. He didn't have to. He had already chosen to trust her. And sometimes, that's the highest compliment a military K9 can give.